In previous episodes, we learned about how Hitler rose to power in Germany and how he started World War II in Europe, followed by key battles and events like the invasion of several countries in Europe, the Battle of Britain, and the North African Campaign. In this video, we'll explore more events towards the end of the war, including battles in the Soviet Union, D-Day, the Battle of Bulge, and more. After Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa in 1941, which was the invasion of the Soviet Union and the largest military operation in history, they were able to make significant progress with large-scale blitzkriegs. Axis troops were able to encircle significant Soviet forces in Vyazma and Bryansk, capturing hundreds of thousands of prisoners. They then approached Leningrad, which Hitler intended to destroy due to its industrial and symbolic significance. The city was encircled by September 8, 1941, with all land routes cut off. This led to extreme famine, cold, and bombardments within the city, with estimates ranging from 600,000 to 1.5 million deaths due to starvation and disease.
Today, we're at the Piskarovskoye Memorial Cemetery, which is the final resting place for over 500,000 people. This includes civilians and military who perished during the Siege of Leningrad. The Siege of Leningrad lasted 872 days from 1941 to 1944, and it was one of the most devastating and longest sieges in history. These mass graves hold the remains of thousands of individuals who perished due to disease, starvation, and bombings. The scale of loss here is almost unimaginable.
The eternal flame symbolizes the undying memory of those who sacrificed their lives. It is a powerful reminder of the resilience and bravery of Leningrad citizens during one of the darkest periods of human history.
After Leningrad was surrounded, the Germans approached the gates of Moscow, which was heavily defended by the Red Army, marking the start of the Battle of Moscow on September 30th, 1941. The Soviets had established a multi-layered defense ring around their capital, and the Germans couldn't call for reinforcements, while fresh Soviet troops from Siberia and the Far East kept being brought in. The German attack slowed down later as temperatures dropped to below freezing and the Nazis encountered stubborn Soviet resistance. Then, on December 5th, the Red Army launched a major counteroffensive. Fresh troops, supported by tanks and rocket launchers, pushed German forces back 100 to 250 kilometers by January 7th.
This is a monument of Georgy Zhukov, the chief of staff of the Red Army during World War II. He organized the defense of Leningrad and Moscow in 1941 and led the final Soviet assault on Berlin in 1945, eventually capturing it.
Just after the battle started, Zhukov was summoned from Leningrad to organize the defense of Moscow. Under his leadership, Moscow was rapidly fortified, and he also planned a pivotal counterattack in December. His leadership and organizational skills were instrumental in the Soviet victory, causing the Battle of Moscow to be a major turning point in World War II. It was the Wehrmacht's first major retreat and resulted in over 400,000 German casualties and the loss of 1,300 German tanks. Shortly after the Battle of Moscow, Hitler decided to invade Stalingrad due to its symbolic significance and oil fields in the Caucasus. The battle began on July 17, 1942, with intense Luftwaffe bombing. The 6th German Army pushed deep into the city and was able to seize around 90% of Stalingrad with great difficulty. However, after the Soviets launched Operation Uranus in November and temperatures dropped to negative 18 degrees Celsius, the Soviets were able to encircle and trap nearly 300,000 German troops. Hitler ordered the Germans to stand and fight, but supplies were insufficient and the 6th Army was doomed. They finally surrendered on February 2nd, 1943, marking the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. However, victory came at a heavy price, as over 80% of the city's buildings were destroyed, and there were over 1 million casualties from both sides, which is why the Battle of Stalingrad is the deadliest battle in history.
After Stalingrad, the Soviets continued pushing westward, leading to the largest tank battle in history at Kursk. Meanwhile, the Allies planned a major offensive to strike back at Hitler. On June 6, 1944, the most pivotal moment during World War II in Europe occurred: Operation Neptune, or D-Day, the largest seaborne invasion in history.
Now we're here at the HMS Belfast. It played a significant role during D-Day landings, opening fire on 5:27 a.m. to target German gun batteries. The ship's bombardment managed to cut telephone lines to the battery's command post, neutralizing its abilities to fire accurately at Allied forces. The ship was decommissioned in 1963 and is now a museum ship permanently moored in the River Thames.
The initial fleet comprised of 6,939 vessels from 8 different navies, with the UK providing 892 warships and 3,261 landing craft. In total, 195,700 Navy personnel were involved, and 112,824 were from the Royal Navy. They were responsible for bombarding German defenses to soften them before troops landed. The D-Day landings targeted an 80-kilometer stretch of the Normandy coast, divided into 5 sections: Utah and Omaha Beach, which were American; Gold and Sword Beach, which were British; and Juno Beach, which was Canadian. Now let's take a deeper look at some of the beaches.
Now we're here at Juno Beach, which was assigned to the Canadian 3rd Infantry Division. Their aim during D-Day was to cut the Calm Bayou Road, seize the airport, and link up with British forces on both sides. The initial landings were delayed due to offshore reefs, and about 30% of the landing craft was damaged or destroyed by mines. However, despite all the casualties, the Canadian troops managed to advance further inland by the end of the day than any other Allied troops. Next to Juno is Gold Beach, which was assigned to the British 50th Infantry Division. They aimed to capture Bayou and the Calm Bayou Road and link up with allies on both sides. Using house-to-house fighting and specialized tanks designed to overcome beach obstacles, they managed to clear several fortified towns and disable 2 major gun emplacements. Now we're here at the longest server battery, which consisted of 4 150mm naval guns and an observation bunker. It was situated between Omaha and Gold Beaches and engaged in firefight with Allied forces during D-Day. It initially forced the British command ship HMS Bololo to retreat, but was later silenced by more Allied bombardment. On June 7th, it was captured by British troops from the 2nd Battalion Devonshire Regiment, and about 120 German soldiers in there surrendered without much resistance. Omaha Beach, where we are now, faced the most difficult terrain of all the beaches, with high cliffs and strong German defenses. This led to Omaha seeing the most casualties of all the D-Day beaches, earning it the nickname Bloody Omaha. The U.S. 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions aimed to establish a beachhead, neutralize German defenses, link up with other beaches, and facilitate follow-up landings by removing dangerous defenses such as barbed wire and mines.
After D-Day, the Allied forces fought intense battles to expand their foothold in Normandy. Eventually, on July 25, 1944, Operation Cobra allowed American forces to break out of Normandy, leading to the rapid collapse of German positions in northern France. Then, Allied armies swiftly advanced across France, and Paris was liberated on August 25, 1944. Continuing the push, much of Belgium was liberated and the Netherlands were entered by September. Meanwhile, more Allies landed in southern France on August 15th, where they advanced northward to link up with armies from Normandy. While the Allies advanced, German forces retreated eastward, suffering heavy losses. However, the invasion slowed due to extended supply lines and heavier German resistance at fortified positions along the Siegfried Line.
To quickly end the war, a major Allied offensive known as Operation Market Garden was launched in September of 1944. The objective was to capture key bridges in the Netherlands to outflank the Siegfried Line and open a route into northern Germany. It combined a large airborne assault, which was Market, and a ground attack, which was Garden. The airborne troops, in what was the largest airborne operation in history at the time, were able to seize a few bridges. However, the critical bridge at Arnhem could not be held due to stronger than expected German resistance and delays in the ground advance. The operation failed to achieve its main objective, resulting in heavy Allied casualties, causing it to be remembered as a bold but flawed gamble. As winter started to set in, the front lines stabilized through the Ardennes region, which was thinly held by mostly inexperienced or recovering American forces. Just as the Allies were regrouping, the Germans launched a massive surprise offensive in December, catching the Allies off guard and plunging the Western Front into chaos once again.
The Battle of the Bulge, otherwise known as the Battle of the Ardennes, began on December 16, 1944, and lasted until January 25, 1945, spanning about 41 days. The main German objective was to split Allied forces and recapture the port of Antwerp. The port was crucial to the already strained Allied supply lines, and by seizing Antwerp, the Nazis hoped to stall the Allied advance and potentially force a negotiated peace.
1 day later.
Just a day after the surprise offensive was launched, German forces committed the infamous Malmedy massacre, killing 84 American prisoners of war, which is a war crime. When word spread, U.S. forces were shocked and angered, with some commanders reportedly telling their units not to take any prisoners. The massacre fueled a desire for justice and hardened American resolve, contributing to further brutality on both sides.
Perhaps the most important place during the battle was a small town called Bastogne in Belgium. It sat at the center of 7 major roads in the Ardennes region, making it crucial for moving troops, tanks, and supplies. By December 22nd, Bastogne was surrounded by German forces. Holding the town was the 101st Airborne Division led by Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe. When the Germans demanded the Americans surrender Bastogne or face annihilation, General McAuliffe famously replied, "Nuts." He then proceeded to withstand repeated ground and air attacks until the siege was lifted on December 26. Although the Nazis were able to achieve initial surprise by exploiting poor weather, American forces mounted stubborn defenses. General George S. Patton played a pivotal role in the Allied response and ultimate victory. Upon learning of the German breakthrough, Patton quickly pivoted his Third Army, a maneuver that involved rerouting 6th Division and over 133,000 vehicles with massive logistical challenges in just a few days. He also developed multiple contingency plans for countering the German attack, codenamed Cent, Nickel, and Dime. He used a different two-pronged attack through the Ardennes with his 4th Armored Division, enduring a grueling 19-hour, 150-mile march through the harsh winter conditions to reach Bastogne.
General Patton's leadership style was characterized by high expectations, strict discipline, aggressive action, and personal example, which inspired his troops profoundly. He was known for his speeches, which were quite often laced with vulgarity. One of our favorite Patton quotes is, "No bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor, dumb bastard die for his." Under Patton's leadership, the Third Army eventually broke through German lines to lift the siege on Bastogne by December 26th and provided critical reinforcements and supplies to the defenders. Patton then led them to continue pressing the attack, contributing to the shrinking and eventual elimination of the German Bulge by late January. For his brilliant strategies, leadership, and success in battle, Patton earned widespread recognition and awards like the Distinguished Service Medal, Legion of Merit, Silver Star, and the 4-star general rank, which is the highest rank normally achievable in the United States Army. Tragically, General Patton passed away as a result of injuries from a car crash in Germany a few months after the end of World War II. He was buried at the Luxembourg American Cemetery alongside fallen soldiers of the Third Army.
The Battle of the Bulge was the last major German offensive of World War II on the Western Front. After it officially ended on January 25, 1945, German resources and morale were depleted, hastening the end of the war in Europe. Prime Minister Winston Churchill even called the Battle of the Bulge undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war. However, victory came at a heavy price, as it was also the largest and bloodiest single battle fought by the US during World War II. Over 500,000 American troops participated, with about 19,000 killed, 47,500 wounded, and 23,000 missing. Inadequate winter gear, disrupted communications, and poor weather all contributed to the Allied challenges. On the other side, German casualty estimates vary widely, between 80,000 and as high as 120,000 killed, wounded, missing, or captured, as German armored and mechanized units face severe fuel shortages, overstretched logistics, poor air support as the Luftwaffe was outnumbered and outclassed once the weather cleared, and the harsh winter. With the German defeat in the Ardennes, the last hope for a Nazi counteroffensive in the West was shattered. The Allies now turned their attention east, preparing for the final push into Germany itself and the climatic Battle of Berlin.
As American and British forces advanced through western Germany, the Soviets closed in on the Nazi capital from the east. By this time, the Red Army had already pushed deep into eastern Germany, much closer to Berlin than Western Allies. At the Yalta Conference, Allied leaders agreed that Berlin would fall within the Soviet post-war occupation zone, but there was no formal agreement on which side would actually capture the city. Stalin was determined for the Soviets to claim the symbolic glory of capturing Hitler's capital to secure a stronger position in post-war negotiations. Recognizing both the heavy casualties an assault would entail and the city's location in the Soviet zone, American and British commanders decided not to make a direct push for Berlin, allowing the Soviets to take the lead in the final assault with an unstoppable force of 2.5 million troops, over 6,000 tanks, and tens of thousands of artillery pieces.
Occurring from April 16th to May 2nd, 1945, the Battle of Berlin marked the culmination of the Soviet offense against Nazi Germany, leading to the fall of Berlin and the end of Hitler's regime. The battle began with massive artillery bombardment at the Seelow Heights. After 4 days of brutal fighting and heavy casualties, Soviet troops broke through and encircled Berlin, trapping the city's desperate defenders. Regular Army, SS, Volkssturm militia, and even children from the Hitler Youth. The fighting during the battle was characterized by brutal house-to-house bombardment, which devastated much of the city. The Soviets relied heavily on artillery and tanks, coordinated closely between infantry and armor, and used engineers to breach obstacles. Their approach emphasized encircling and segmenting cities, isolating defenders, and using overwhelming force to reduce resistance.
Now we're here at Hitler's bunker, which now lies beneath a parking lot and was also partially destroyed by Soviets during the Battle of Berlin. However, much of the structure has remained intact despite efforts to cover it up or fill it in during urban development in the late 1980s.
Hitler moved in on January 16, 1945, and his life there was marked by a sense of impending doom. He married his wife Eva Braun on April 29, 1945, one day before their suicides. The Führer bunker was a symbol of Hitler's final days and the collapse of Nazi Germany.
On May 2nd, 1945, General Helmut Weidling surrendered to Lieutenant General Vasily Zhukov. On this day, Soviet soldiers famously raised their flag over the ruins of the Reichstag, the same Reichstag that Hitler used to consolidate power at the beginning of his regime, turning a symbol of Nazi dictatorship into a powerful piece of Soviet victory propaganda, marking the fall of the Nazis 12 years and millions of casualties later. With Berlin fallen and Hitler dead, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz assumed leadership of what remained of the German government. He tried to negotiate partial surrenders to avoid Soviet captivity for German refugees and armies, but the Allies demanded a total, unconditional surrender.
Now we're here at the Museum of the Surrender in Reims, France. It's located on the exact spot where World War II in Europe came to an end. The surrender was signed on May 7, 1945 at 2:41 a.m. and represented the unconditional surrender of all German armed forces. It also led to the liberation of Allied prisoners of war and civilian internees under German control, and the authority of the German government became subject to the Allied powers.
The instrument of unconditional surrender was signed by General Alfred Jolde, Chief of Staff of the German Army. It covered all German forces on land, sea, and in the air, requiring them to cease all active operations at 11:01 p.m. Central European Time on May 8th, allowing a 48-hour grace period to communicate the order. This is why Victory Day and Europe Day is celebrated on May 8th, even though the surrender was signed a day before.
The Allied representatives present included Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith for the United States, General Ivan Susapara for the Soviet Union, and French Major General Francois Sèvres as a witness. However, later the Soviet Union objected to these terms because it was signed in Western Allied headquarters and not in Berlin, the German capital. They also thought that the signatories were not senior enough or representative of all the military branches. To satisfy these concerns, the Allies and Germany agreed to a second, more formal surrender the next day in Berlin. It was signed by Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel this time, with Marshal Zhukov from the Soviet Union, British and American deputies, and a French witness present.
After news of the surrender spread worldwide, the citizens of Europe collectively heaved a sigh of relief for the first time in 6 years. Spontaneous celebrations erupted in London, Paris, New York, and many other cities. However, things were far from being back to normal. Europe, and especially Germany, was in tatters. Over the 6 years of war, the lives of over 15 million daughters, sons, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, and friends had been claimed. Many more millions of refugees flooded makeshift camps, with up to 66% of housing in major cities destroyed. Conditions for civilians remained dire throughout 1945, with food, housing, and employment scarce.
To figure out what to do next, leaders of the United States, United Kingdom, and Soviet Union convened in Sicilianov Palace in Potsdam, just 35 kilometers away from Berlin.
This is the palace where the famous Potsdam Conference took place. It was attended by the leaders of the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States. They decided on how to split Germany, the new boundaries of Poland, and the definition of the Soviet Union's role in the Eastern Europe, and more. In other wars, there would usually be amity and friendship, but each country was mostly concerned with its own self-interest.
The Potsdam Conference was held from July 17th to August 2nd, 1945, with U.S. President Harry Truman, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who was later replaced by Clement Attlee, and Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. One of the key decisions made during the conference was the division of Germany and Austria into 4 occupation zones, each controlled by the U.S., UK, Soviet Union, and France. Berlin and Vienna, the capital cities, were also split into 4. The Allies also laid out a framework for governing Germany, with a plan called the 5 Ds: demilitarization, denazification, democratization, decentralization, and deindustrialization.
Germany's borders were also redrawn. A new eastern frontier named the Oder-Neisse Line shifted large areas of former German territory to Poland, resulting in the forced immigration of millions of ethnic Germans. Many of these people had to leave their homes on foot, joining the already massive population of refugees. At the same time, tensions were growing. The Soviets wanted to control and influence Eastern Europe, while the Western Allies wanted democracy. This uneasy cooperation at Potsdam would soon collapse into ideological division, sowing the seeds of the start of the Cold War.
By the time the conference ended, guns in Europe had been silent for 3 months, but the damage was still everywhere. Economies had to be rebuilt, new governments had to be created, and justice still had to be found. While the Potsdam Conference tried to lay the groundwork for peace, it also revealed how divided even the Allies really were, and that tension would only grow in the years ahead.